Welcome to another Fit Wallet segment of the Lifelong Health and Fitness Conversations podcast. The Fit Wallet series focuses on that other aspect of fitness in our lives, financial fitness. In this episode, I interview James McDaniel, a Texas real estate investor who made his first successful property investment at just 19 years old. During this interview, James offers advice on ways to begin investing in real estate, his thoughts on the current single-family home market, his forecasts across the housing market, and his personal goals to build wealth in real estate. Now on to our conversation. So James, I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. I spoke with you recently. We met on the Texas Real Estate Investing Association Facebook group, and I was looking for someone with real estate investing experience, and you contacted me to give me some of your experience to share with listeners. So thank you for joining me, James.
Thank you for having me.
So how did you get started with real estate investing?
Sure. So I guess I started when I was 19. I didn't really know what I was doing, but it started off as a house hack. I bought a mobile home and I started renting out my rooms, and the rent from the rooms paid my mortgage and then also paid all my utilities. So I was living for free. That's how I initially started out. And then I ended up later owner financing that same mobile home to a buyer as well. And then I didn't really get into it again for several years. I didn't really have a mentor. I didn't really know where to start, but I knew I always wanted to. And then finally in 2015, I decided to start looking into it and started consuming videos like crazy on YouTube. And then I got into wholesaling at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen your YouTube videos. I see you're in a uniform. Do you currently work in law enforcement?
Yeah, I do. I work with the Travis County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, so do you have a long-term goal of having real estate ultimately be your main source of income?
Definitely. My goal is to have enough passive income to supplement my current income so I can retire.
Okay. So that first investment, you still have that property?
Oh, no, that's been sold years ago.
Oh, okay. So what are your thoughts on single family investing?
Sure. So investing in single family is definitely a great way to build wealth. If you're, even as a long-term rental, but to really, you have to look at your timeline as far as, what that goal is. To scale with single family, it's really hard to do that. And I think if you want to stay in the single family market, well, then you need to also implement some wholesaling involved with that. Because with wholesaling, it doesn't really take a lot of capital, and you're still, when you're looking at scaling, as buy and holds, with single family, you need a lot of capital. And to supplement that capital, then you can do some wholesaling to kind of build the capital coming in, and then to also scale your business quicker.
Okay, so we're going to stick to single family investing today, but do you have a long-term goal of maybe getting into multifamily?
I'm looking at different ways of scaling. I'm looking at note investing. I'm looking at multifamily, smaller multifamilies that are owned by individuals, and possible building a syndication. But like you said, that's a whole different conversation.
Okay. So with today's market conditions, what are your thoughts on single family investing for, say, someone starting out? And, it could be pretty pessimistic right now.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things you ask, depending on what part of the state you're in, depending on what part of the country you're in, it seems like there's a lot of confusion in the market right now. Whenever last month's housing data came out, it says that the overall real estate market is at the highest it's ever been with sales and with mortgages, new mortgages. But whenever you look at local markets, like here in Texas, like, it's going to vary. In San Antonio, for instance, and that's primarily where I look at, the market has taken a little bit of a decrease in price, average sales price. And then also there's a lot of properties that are staying dormant on the market. So it shows that there's still a lot of pain in a lot of markets. And whenever you have the interest rates increasing, obviously your buying power decreases. Whenever the market rates or the interest rates were 3%, a $500,000 house is going to cost a lot less monthly than it would if it has an 8% interest rate. So you've got different markets experiencing different things. I think there's going to be some more pain ahead. I think finishing out 2023, I think we'll still see at least one more interest rate increase, or at least things are going to stay where they're at with the interest rates, and we won't see a decrease until probably next year in 2024. And even with that decrease, they're not going to decrease it by a point or 2 points. They're going to decrease it probably a quarter to a half a point each, depending on what Jerome Powell believes and what the FOMC believe. They don't want the market to surge. And if they drop a point at a time or 2 points at a time, the market will rally again, and inflation will, continue to stay high. So I think those factors, he's being Jerome Powell and the FOMC, they're being very cautious right now. So there's going to be a lot more pain continuing this year and next year. And I think in the next couple of years, when the interest rates start catching up with the higher interest rates, and these properties start catching up with a lot of investors with their rental properties, I think even the rental markets are going to be increasing. And that's going to create a lot of pain for people that rent houses and rent apartments. Be a very challenging time, and and that's why your acquisition into rental properties is going to be key. And you really have to be open to learning different skill sets.
Yeah, and when you're saying that rents will get more expensive, so that reminds me of situations where, say, people want to get out of a house. So they might stay in a house because they got a good interest rate, but say they're in a situation where they want to get out of a house because it's an unsustainable environment for whatever reason. So you do creative financing.
Yes.
What are some techniques that you as an investor can use to get someone out of a tight spot if they want to get out of a home, but they don't want to necessarily go directly into an apartment? What are some ways you can entice someone who wants to get out of a tricky living situation, but at the same time feels that they're stuck because of the interest rates?
Sure. So, the best strategy to use in that case, whenever you have low equity or an upside down mortgage, let's say they bought at the peak of the market and they now have a $300,000 mortgage, and then their house is only worth $250 or $270, $280. We're seeing a lot of that out there. And the best way, an investor like myself will still look at a property and still offer to take over payments for their mortgage. And it's called a subject to transaction. I can still, especially if they have an interest rate that's 3%, 4%, I don't think we'll ever see those interest rates again or for several years. So you want to, as an investor, that interest rate is just as valuable as the actual property itself. And I'm okay with taking a property that's upside down in the mortgage, and because I know that I'm going to hold it for a while and either sell it on a route or even as a long-term rental. It's still possible to even make that cash flow as a long-term rental. But those are some of the and then of course you got to be creative with your exit too. But if it doesn't cash flow as a rental, but anyway, to help those sellers get out. I think subject to is going to be the way to go, but it may not be the ideal situation for some people as well.
Yeah, and subject to would at least give them some funds to get out of the situation and find a different place.
Yeah, and it may not, that's going to be up to the individual investor. Some investors like to give them some money at closing just to help with moving costs. And, if you see a house on the market, and they're already low equity or underwater, they may have to come cash out of pocket just to close. And, of course, it's all up to open to negotiations. But, if I pay the realtor fees, of 3% and pay for closing costs and take over payments, well, then that seller can actually get out of the house without paying anything out of pocket.
Okay. So can you list some techniques that you have utilized over your investing career? And
Sure.
which one would you think is best?
With which one is best, that's going to depend on the person's exit strategy. And, that's a little subjective to a lot of strategies and a lot of the way the investors think. But the easiest way, I'll start that, with my definition of what the easiest way to get in would be to do a house hack, and the reason for that is that you can buy a house. Typically, the best idea would be getting a duplex, triplex, or a quadplex, because FHA and VA loans, they will qualify for those smaller multifamily properties. And I think that would be the easiest way with the lowest money down. I think FHA, you can get 3% down or something like that, 3.5% down, and you can get a lower interest rate. That's the easiest way for someone to do this. Wholesaling, of course, is always something that I've done and that has worked for me. A lot less risk involved. It takes a little bit of skill with understanding the market and getting a good price. And of course, your sales skills come in handy too. And then with subject to transactions and then selling them on a route, that's what I'm implementing now. And that's not really an entry level type technique, because there's in Texas, there's some laws that govern are making sure you're doing the subject to correctly. And then also when your exit is around, there's some other laws that come involved with, disclosures, and make sure you're in compliance with some state and federal laws.
Okay, so can you briefly explain the wrap? And you did touch on subject to a bit. We could circle back to that after, but can you briefly explain a wrap for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So a wrap is basically just owner financing. Whenever you have an underlying loan, I'll give you one example that I'm working on now. The underlying loan is $220,000, and the comps in the area are about $280,000. So there's a little bit of an equity piece there. And if I owner finance it, I'm taking additional risks by owner financing. So what I'll do is I'll add some manufactured equity, as they call it, for my additional risk. So even though I have a loan that's for $220,000 and then I'm selling it for $300,000, that creates about an $80,000 worth of equity. When you're owner financing on a route, I'm actually making two notes. The note for the $220,000, and that's the underlying loan, and then also the manufactured equity for the other piece. And then I'm selling it as, it's called a wraparound mortgage. So it encompasses, the way I like to think of it is it's wrapping around the existing or underlying loan and that equity.
Okay. So you did mention manufactured equity, which some people might note as forced equity.
Yeah, it could be that called too.
So to the listeners, just briefly, it's when you add value to the home in some way. One example could be different various upgrades, repairs. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually it can be that. or it could just be forced equity, or is just my risk in owner financing. Because if I'm owner financing it to someone and that maybe not be able to qualify for a traditional FHA loan, or if they are self-employed, or maybe their credit requirements aren't uh, to the standard level. So I'm taking an extra risk by owner financing it to a subprime consumer or borrower. I take that risk of possible foreclosure, an additional risk. So it's, in a sense, it's not really value add when you're looking at the actual property. It's covering my risk, potential risk.
Okay. And we'll get into that more in a future episode because I have some questions about that.
Sure.
So you mentioned you started at 18, so or sorry, 19. So it's been a
Uh-huh.
while. What are some gotchas or some things that people should watch out for when they get into real estate investing to mitigate losses or getting into a bad deal?
So that's actually a great question because I'm experiencing a potential bad deal right now. Um, with an investment in real estate, there's always going to be some kind of risk involved. Actually, any kind of investment, there's a risk. The best way to mitigate those risks is to make sure you have capital, access to capital, and that could be from business lines of credit, business credit cards. And of course, I say those things because typically you don't want to hurt your personal business or your personal credit. With when you have a high utilization, it really negatively affects your personal credit. So you try to do everything on business credit. Or another way to mitigate, or have access to capital is just make sure you have $10,000 to $15,000 in reserves, just to make sure something comes up, or to mitigate that unexpected expense. And then of course another way to mitigate risk is to have multiple exit strategies in mind, and you look at the ones that will offer a greater return.
Okay, have you done any partnerships and have you been in any risky situations with that?
Oh, sure. I've taken on a partner where we had a 50-50% split, on expense and on a profit, and that's been a good partnership with that. And then also I've had a private money lender come in on the deal that I said that I have a bad deal now. I initially thought it was only going to be a small portion of the rehab, and I had a private money lender come in and give me 30,000 to, and my rehab is going to end up being closer to probably 50,000. So I needed those rehab. I'm glad that I had the access to that extra capital. And if I needed to go back, there's enough equity in that property that I could go get another private money lender. However, they would take a third position lien, and they may not want to do that. So I'd have to probably find an equity partner if I needed to go back and get more capital.
Okay, so a layperson might say there's some equity in the property. I could get a HELOC or something like that. Why would you not do that? And is it just more of a layperson would see that as an option, but a private money lender would give you better terms, for example?
Well, yeah. So finding a HELOC or finding a lender for a HELOC on an investment property is going to be challenging. And then also finding a HELOC that will take a third position would be challenging as well.
Yeah, no.
And and then also most HELOCs on investment properties will only go up to like 70, maybe 75% of the value. So and those are viable for certain properties, but when you have a property that needs work, you're not going to get probably a HELOC to, for that investment property, unless if it's appraising at top value. There are some people that will get a HELOC on their primary residence, and that's how they start investing in real estate. That's not something that I've ever undergone, but I know people do that as well.
Okay. Can you expand on the single family market conditions today before we close? Just more on what you stated before, inflation and other factors that are affecting the single family market.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I kind of left hanging there was the rental rates are going to be increasing. And I'd like to explore the commercial property aspect regarding apartment complexes and the loans that they are in. When we saw low interest rates, a lot of apartment complexes, and these are the property owners, they went and refinanced into these lower interest rates so they could get a better return for their investment or investors. Well, I think it's several trillion. I don't know the exact number, but a trillion's a lot of dollars. And there's over $1 trillion that will be ballooning at the end of this year. So whenever you get an apartment complex loan or a loan for a large multifamily project, typically those loans are ballooned in 3 to 5 years. Well, there's a large percentage of those that are ballooning at the end of this year. So that means they're going to have to refinance it into another loan where they might be currently under a 4% interest rate, but now they're going to have to refinance at an 8% interest rate. Well, you're going to have a lot of properties that are
rents increasing.
Yeah, and if they are able to refinance, they're going to have to increase the rent rates.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, you have a lot of residents that are already there that have a year-long lease under the old rental rate. So, they'll be protected, but these new renters will come in and have to pay, $200-300 or more dollars a month to help cover their minimum debt service, on the apartment loan side, right? So it's going to be either that or you're going to have a lot of apartment complexes just default on their loans. And if that happens, then you'll have these huge hedge funds coming in, and they'll be buying all of this debt, all this bad debt. And I don't know exactly how that will look with the consumer, but I don't know exactly, either that or maybe government bailouts. Something's going to have to happen. And what's really bad is that not many people are specifically talking about the apartment complex issue, and how that's going to affect the rent rates.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're running out of time, but yeah, we definitely have to look more into that just as consumers. Can you provide tips or motivating words on how to navigate investing, the investing days ahead based on what you said?
Yeah, sure. So I think the big thing is some of the motivating words would be to know your market. Be careful, with getting into any type of new debt at the 8% interest rates. If you get into new debt at 8%, you will need to probably look at different exit strategies. Be open to, just all the, whether it be midterm or corporate rentals. Look into, owner financing. Nonetheless, if you have enough capital reserves to be a negative cash flow each month on a long-term rental, you need to be open to other strategies and try to do subject to as much as possible to be able to get some of these lower interest rates. And that's about it. That's all the advice I have.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, James. And We will be having an episode in the future, and I look forward to you expanding on your knowledge.
Thank you very much for having me.
That concludes my interview with James McDaniel. I hope you all were able to take some lessons away from this interview, and please tune in for a future episode with Mr. McDaniel for more in-depth real estate investment advice. Thank you for listening, and remember to stay strong and well.